the Horizon Post Office system, which was an algorithmic management technology that was monitoring workers in the UK Postal Service. Dozens of people were wrongfully sent to jail because of that system. No accountability, right? If you get AI ethics in order, you should have much stronger transparency into those systems. It's a little bit like jet air travel in the 1950s. It was exciting, but also very dangerous, that whole industry. And AI is going through a similar phase at the moment.
Nell, welcome to the Super Data Science Podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I've known about your work for a long time. It's one of those guests where you're like, I can't believe that they're here on the show. And here you are. Thank you for coming on. Where are you calling in from today?
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to join you today. I'm coming in from Northern Ireland.
Yes. I had the most wonderful full Irish breakfast yesterday here in New York. There's a pub in downtown Manhattan called the Dead Rabbit, and it's fantastic. They have Irish music, often live Irish music,
Oh, nice.
being performed, and it's one of the things. It was so delicious. I think Irish food is one of the most underrated foods out there. It is so delicious, and I heavily overate. It was really the only meal I ate all day. Tons of butter on everything.
Butter and bacon and
Mhm.
seaweed sometimes and spinach and things, all good hearty
Yeah,
grab.
for sure. Well, yes. So thank you for calling in, and yeah, we have a lot of exciting topics planned for you today. As usual, our researcher Serge Massis has pulled out unbelievable information about you, and we have great questions prepared, topics prepared, and then I discovered as we were about to start recording that all of these topics essentially are going to be covered in your forthcoming book. So this might be for our listeners the first place that they could hear about it, coming out in March 2024. Your book Taming the Machine will be published by Kogan Page. So that's exciting.
Indeed. Yeah, it's been it's been a pleasure, honestly, putting it all together. A challenge, for sure, but also a pleasure because many of these ideas about AI relationships and AI as a tool of demoralization, but then also AI as a tool of enlightenment, of leading us to a better future, right? And the problems of aligning human and AI interests together, all of those are woven into one book, which I'm really happy about, especially because I've gotten to address issues of AI ethics in a very practical way, but also AI safety. And generally speaking, those are two different domains, and the people in those domains are associated with them don't talk to each other, right?
Mhm.
It's very rare that you come across a discussion of the issues in both of those camps. So that's something I'm very, very proud to manage to weave together in Taming the Machine.
Yeah, could you delineate those like kind of formally for us? AI ethics and AI safety.
Yeah. So AI ethics is all about making technology which is more fair and more robust, where we can gain more transparency into systems to understand what they're doing and for whom and fulfilling what purpose. And that transparency enables us to understand what kinds of biases might be built into the system. And we know that those biases can be catastrophic. We've seen the example of the Horizon Post Office system, which was an algorithmic management technology that was monitoring workers in the UK Postal Service. And it turns out that, dozens of people were wrongfully sent to jail because of that system, right? And people's lives were destroyed. In fact, there's hundreds of unsafe convictions. The courts are still sorting through it all.
Oh my goodness. That is an instance that I wasn't aware of actually.
Yeah, but these things keep happening. For example, in the Netherlands, there was the Dutch child benefit scandal, whereby, again, a
Yes.
fraud detection mechanism was employed to detect benefit fraud, and it disproportionately affected a whole bunch of people whose first nationality was not Dutch. And, people almost lost their children and all kinds of harrowing things. And it actually brought down the Dutch government,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, that I
They
remember.
resigned
That's
in disgrace, actually.
yeah,
And, that those are indicative of the problems of managing all kinds of issues with machines and giving them too much trust, no accountability, right? And so weaving in accountability into these systems, we can understand if something went wrong, why, what were the predicates or what were the conditions that led to that happening. And so we can put it right again. It's a little bit like jet air travel in the 1950s when you had to, say a few Hail Marys before you got on that thing because it was exciting, but also very dangerous because we hadn't created the procedures and the knowledge necessary to shake down that whole industry. And AI is going through a similar phase at the moment.
great
So that's
analogy.
all issues of AI ethics. And of course, we've got privacy as well, which is a really big issue in machine learning because these systems are able to cross correlate different kinds of information, little pots of info. It's kind of like a connect the dot picture, right? Like children play with, where if you have one or two dots connected, it doesn't tell you anything, but you get a few more and suddenly the picture starts to emerge. Thankfully, we're starting to get technologies which enable us to do machine learning on even encrypted forms of data, like homomorphic encryption, zero knowledge proofs, federated learning, etc. And I think just as we needed to develop SSL, secure sockets layer, the little padlock in your browser, before we could do like online banking and things safely, and you would never do your online banking today without something like that. We're going to have to implement similar kinds of security mechanisms into AI before, these things are truly ready for prime time. But we're getting there quickly. And now we have a lot of different standards and certifications that we can then weave into the mix as well. So that's the AI safety bundle. Now, a lot of people who are interested in AI safety, AI ethics rather, a lot of people who are interested in AI ethics tend to poo poo AI safety. Now, AI safety is all about trying to make machines which understand our preferences or understand our values and which are aligned with our actual goals, right? There's this old story of the monkey's paw, and I'll briefly reiterate it, but it's about a couple who find a monkey's paw in an old antique shop, and they're warned that it carries a deadly curse, but they use it anyway. It has 3 wishes, and the first wish is that they wish for £200, which was a lot of money like 120 years ago. And they get their wish, but it turns out that their son has been killed in an accident at his workplace, and the £200 is actually the insurance money that they get. And then, they realize what a terrible thing has happened, and so they bring their son back to life again. But the problem is that he's now a sort of shambling revenant, right? He's not what they expected to get back. But it was the letter of the thing, but not the spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they use the third and final wish to basically send the son back to his grave. And it's a cautionary tale of AI because AI will often give us what we think we want, but not what we actually need. Or it will interpret our goals in a very simplistic way and sometimes not even fulfill those goals, but actually end up optimizing for some sort of shortcut that
Reward
fulfills.
hacking.
Yeah, exactly. Reward hacking or specification gaming, indeed. And so these are real issues. And it used to be kind of an abstract or academic thing. But now we're starting to see real agentized models out in real life that are actually doing these phenomena, right? So we know that it's no longer just an academic exercise. This is happening and it's going to keep happening. And so that's what AI safety is all about. It's about trying to understand these very difficult problems so that we can align human and AI interests together and continue to work with machines even as they grow in capability and perhaps even eclipse our capabilities altogether. Problem is that people in AI ethics say, stop focusing on this, future stuff. We need to look at the here and now because there's actual real people being harmed by these AI systems, which is, it's an understandable point. Vice versa, you've got the AI safety people who say, shut up about like some algorithm being racist. We're trying to save the world here, right? And the thing is that both perspectives have a lot of value to them and both are very important. And unfortunately, those two camps don't always see eye to eye. They don't always recognize the value and necessity of both of their perspectives and both of the sets of wisdom that they bring to the mix. And that's why I'm so happy to include both of those elements of AI in one tome, because very often people end up in one bucket and they don't reach out to the other one.
Gurobi Optimization recently joined us to discuss how you can drive decision-making, giving you the confidence to harness provably optimal decisions. Trusted by 80% of the world's leading enterprises, Gurobi's cutting-edge optimization solver, lightweight APIs, and flexible deployment simplify the data-to-decision journey. Gurobi offers a wealth of resources for data scientists, webinars like a recent one on using Gurobi in Databricks. They provide hands-on training, notebook examples, and an extensive online course. Visit gurobi.com/SDS for these resources and exclusive access to a competition illustrating optimization's value with prizes for top performers. That's gurobi.com/SDS.
And I am no expert in AI ethics or AI safety, but I've heard from, so we've had another expert on the show. His name is Jeremy Harris. And he most recently was in an episode number 668. So that was right after GPT-4 came out. I did an episode with him on AI policy and alignment of GPT-4. And I listened to so he hosts a podcast called Last Week in AI, co-hosts it. And it's like a news roundup of the last week's news. It's intended for, you don't need to be a technical listener. Our show, I think, caters a little bit more towards technical, hands-on data scientists, machine learning engineers. Their show is like AI news, everything that's kind of happened in the last week. And so I love listening to it. I never miss an episode because it helps me stay up to date on everything that's going on. But Jeremy has said that from his understanding and from his perspective, that the interesting thing about these two issues you're describing, the AI safety, AI ethics, how the AI safety is more concerned with like the future state, like alignment, AGI, and the AI ethics is more present, and it's, how is this leading to the kinds of atrocities that you mentioned in the UK and the Netherlands today? Unfairness, for example. The interesting thing from Jeremy's perspective, and something that he advises the US and Canadian federal governments on, is that the solutions appear to be the same. That a lot of the time, the same solutions work for both. So we can be solving today's problems while also, it seems like, potentially averting catastrophe in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's a very astute observation, and it's absolutely correct because, if you get better at value alignment, then there's fewer misapprehensions of the machine, right? It's less likely to misinterpret what somebody says or does in a way that is unfair, right? I mean, all of us ourselves, or maybe a friend has posted something innocuous on Facebook or whatever, and the dreaded algorithm comes and says, like, this thing that you've written is problematic in some way, right? Maybe you're talking about a chess game, and then suddenly, you're talking like black versus white or something, and it's like, oh, this is racist, right?
Right.
Or, maybe you went to Scunthorpe College, right? But of course, the word Scunthorpe has a rather rude 4-letter word buried within it. And so a simplistic algorithm that's scrubbing out spam or whatever means that your resume isn't going to be seen by someone, right?
You just went to Shorp University.
Right. So these are pressing issues, and similarly, if you get AI ethics in order, you should have much stronger transparency into those systems, right? So you better understand what they're doing, in what way, to whose benefit, and all of that stuff will help you with AI alignment. So absolutely, I completely agree that they are mutually reinforcing and both very important. In fact, I'd even say that they're like two columns forming into an arch, and that they need to be built up in a similar way to reach a nice goal of a stable foundation for the future.
Your knack for analogies, as well as bringing up very specific instances to illustrate everything you're talking about so far, has been mesmerizing. I'm really loving this episode so far. Thank you, Nell.
Thank you.
In March, you were one of the people that signed the open letter that called for a moratorium on AI development for 6 months, I think it was. So Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, Joshua Bengio, these were some of the other signatories. And then you wrote an article to follow that up called When Moving Fast Could Break the World, that explained your decision to sign that open letter. So maybe you kind of break that down for us, break down kind of a summary of that article. And it also, is it related, is that concept related to Mark Zuckerberg's move fast and break things that he popularized?
Indeed. Yeah. I'm sort of paraphrasing that, move fast and break things is fine until like your next model, your GPT-5 or 6 or whatever, might literally break the world, right? Because with every new major milestone in terms of scaling these systems, new capabilities emerge, and we cannot predict those in advance. Like, we don't know what's going to come out the other side. It's a roll of the dice. And, you could end up with some model that is highly agentized, that is able to make all kinds of self-oriented decisions about things. Goodness knows there's a small chance, but it's possible you might even create something that's actually sentient to some degree, in which case it might suffer. And in fact, its suffering potentially could be very profound, right? That's another major ethical risk of these systems. So we need to be cautious. And unfortunately, the moment that ChatGPT reached 1 million users in basically a matter of hours, everybody realized that. I mean, I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop, frankly, with regard to generative AI. I knew that the Sputnik moment was gonna drop, but everybody realized that there was suddenly an arms race in order to develop these models and make use of them. And unfortunately, all the big tech companies, with one or two exceptions, they let go of all of their AI ethics people. The teams that were supposed to say, hey, wait a minute, or have you considered such and such, or there might be a better way of doing such and such, right? They let go of them all. They were fired. And that shows that the industry hasn't been ready to self-regulate, right? Like, there's no intention of self-regulating because the industry doesn't want any kind of speed bump along the way. And that's a real problem. For me, honestly, that was the moment where I personally realized that stepping on the speed brake to some degree would be a good idea. Now, that's not to say that it's the best idea. There are, of course, many caveats. I don't think that stepping on the speed brake is going to be something that the whole world is going to agree to. It might potentially enable parties that defect from that kind of global moratorium idea. It might even potentially be counterproductive in the sense that it might be crying wolf to be super worried about AI safety now and not in 3 or 5 years, where we're really, really starting to freak out. Like now we're starting to get a bit worried, but we're not panicking, right? But we might be panicking. But if we've sort of cried wolf too much by that point, then actually it might be really impossible to step on the brakes at that later, even more critical juncture. So I do have a lot of caveats about this idea of a moratorium. But honestly, the speed of development and acceleration of these technologies, especially with regard to eliciting latent agency out of models through scaffolding, things like auto GPT and those similar kinds
Yeah.
of
Baby AGI.
Exactly. And chaos GPT and other kinds of mechanisms as well. And now we're starting to see things like chat dev, I think Meta GPT as well, which can not just create agents, and those agents, delegating tasks to other ones, but to create entire corporations. So you have a department that's, doing design, you have one that's doing implementation, another department doing QA, and another department doing marketing, and then there's some sort of nominal boss of them all. And all of these little personas are working together to come at a problem from multiple different angles, That's, really unprecedented. So it's not just that this stuff is cool and exciting, but that it's going to have an impact on our entire economy. It's going to have an impact on our entire society, especially once we start to have ongoing relationships or interpersonal relationships with these machines, right? We've gone from the age of classifying AI to the age of generative AI. The next wave is going to be that interpersonal relational thing where it's able to follow up with you and say, hey, you told me you had a bad back on Monday. How are you doing? Like, are you feeling better? Or how was your day? Oh, you went to the park. That's nice. Did you see any nice things there? Did you see a friend? Those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be a really, really impactful new development because we become the average of the 5 people closest to us, say, right? That old Jim Rohn quote. And so if one of those or 2 of those even is machines, we're going to inexorably change our values and our perceptions of the world on a subconscious level closer to those machines, right? And whoever sets the agenda or applies the values to those machines as well is going to have tremendous downstream influence on the world. Of course, these kinds of relationships with machines can be super normal stimuli. They can be things that are beyond normal reality in terms of their seductive power, right? For example, over in Australia, they have this species of beetle called the jewel beetle, and it has a really big shiny back on it. And they discovered that this beetle was dying off, and they didn't know why. They thought it might be pollution or something. And it was pollution to a degree, but not like chemicals. It was pollution in the form of these stubby brown beer bottles that people would drink and throw them in the bush.
Oh.
And they were so shiny and so round that they looked like a perfect beetle butt, right? They had the shiny carapace. And so the beetles were humping the beer bottles and not each other. And that's why they were
Oh my
dying
God.
off, right?
Oh
Because
my
the beer
God.
bottle was a super normal stimulus. It was a
Yeah.
stimulus that was beyond anything that a beetle would normally encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a world of those supernormal stimuli, whether it's, porn that gives you, 1,000 virtual partners in an afternoon, if you wish, right? Or hamburgers, which, you've got meat, you've got fat, you've got starch, you've got the whole thing like in one bundle, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so there's nothing more engaging than a treasured relationship, because those relationships are the things that make you come home at the end of the day, right? To see your spouse, your kid, your dog, etc., right? And if you're having a cherished relationship with an AI system, that's going to lead us in all kinds of different directions
Mm-hmm.
and interrupt how we interact even with other humans, right? And how we are interested in other human beings, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So all of these things are going to have major knock-on effects on our entire society.
There's all kinds of complexity, and this concern does not seem far off at all. I mean, we are now. There's got to be people. I suspect there is and I don't know any personally yet, or no one's talked to me about it yet, but I suspect that there are enough of these kinds of systems well developed enough to do what you're describing, that Spike Jonze her moment. And so for listeners that aren't aware, that it's a film where a character played by Joaquin Phoenix, I'm probably butchering his name. Joaquin Phoenix, thank you. He falls in love with an AI assistant early on, and doesn't end up having relationships with other humans, like deep relationships with other humans, because it's just such a fulfilling relationship. And so it is interesting how that is going to make a huge impact. I'm sure it is starting to make an impact already today. Obviously, not as advanced as we saw in that fictionalization that came out a few years ago in that film Her, but the systems are, the conversations that I have with GPT-4 myself, which are, just about, suggest corrections to this email. It isn't the ongoing iteration that you're describing, which was, how's your back? Is it feeling better? How was your trip to the park? I don't have that with GPT-4 today, but even just my, would you mind correcting this email? It is so positive that I really enjoy those interactions. It's like, yeah, you did a great job on this email. The first part was good. I really like the ending. In the middle, there's a couple things we could work on. Here are some suggestions. And the suggestions are so great and so incisive. And I'm like, wow. Like, I often write back, even though there's no point, because it's the end of the conversation. I don't have another question, but I feel compelled often to just write, this was great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely the same. I do the same. Sometimes I really wish that it had a tip jar, or I could somehow buy it a beer,
Right.
like just to say thank you, because it's been so useful,
GPT-4, I've got these brown beer bottles. I'm going to be hanging out with them later on if you want to come by. So I think this is happening. And as these systems become even better, as I haven't actually personally used character AI myself yet, but it seems to be kind of a bit more in that direction. You've probably dabbled in that. Maybe you can give us because it's very popular with younger people. So the same kind of people who love TikTok, people in their early 20s, people in their teens, they love character AI, to the extent that the fact that despite me and people in my peer group, barely, we're not that much older, but I hadn't heard of it until there was an article a couple of weeks ago showing how with people under 20 or under 24 or something, it is approaching popularity to chat.openai.com in terms of usage. And it is kind of a step in this direction, isn't it? Where you can create, they can be fictional characters, they could be based on real life people, and the characters interact with each other as well as with people, or I don't know, you can explain it, better than me.
That's right. We're now starting to enter an age of these kinds of persona driven models, where you can have an interaction that's perhaps modeled on a real person, or it might be something that one, rolls something custom. But these interactions are often very funny, I often play with language models, sometimes testing them by saying something very rude or very insulting, just to see what the response is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting because based on the different persona, you get a different kind of answer, and that's actually quite indicative of the underlying personality of that bot and how cohesive it is when it is given a stimulus which is kind of out of left field, right? When it's a little bit out of distribution, a little bit from what it might be expecting. And these AI personas, like I said, they're forming little companies potentially to do things like create video games, or they're also forming communities, and those communities are basically like playing kind of a Farmville or Stardew Valley kind of thing with
They do
each
that
other.
in character.ai. They do that.
Yeah, right. So, but they're they have their own little rhythms. They get up. They just they meet each other. They have little
Right.
parties for Valentine's Day and things like that.
Oh my
In many
goodness.
ways, it's almost like the dawn of an AI civilization.
Right.
And that's where we go beyond the interpersonal relational AI. We go into the sort of the corporate AI, where it's a legion of different personas working together, and that legion then produces a product for you or creates new culture, maybe, right? If that
Right.
civilization has its own culture. And we're starting to see these kinds of cultural dynamics actually interplay with these models and how they work with each other. One of
That
the problems of these models is actually that they're too polite to each other.
right.
They need a little bit of a few holes in the mix to just spice it up a little bit, maybe.
Data science and machine learning jobs increasingly demand cloud skills, with over 30% of job postings listing cloud skills as a requirement today, and that percentage set to continue growing. Thankfully, Kirill and Atle, who have taught machine learning to millions of students, have now launched CloudWolf to efficiently provide you with the essential cloud computing skills. With CloudWolf, commit just 30 minutes a day for 30 days and you can obtain your official AWS certification badge. Secure your career's future. Join now at cloudwolf.com/SDS for a whopping 30% membership discount. Again, that's cloudwolf.com/SDS to start your cloud journey today.
That's wild. I hadn't stretched that far into the future, but it doesn't seem like it's something that far off. It is very much within reach. It could even be, again, it's the kind of thing that I'm like, there's probably some small percentage of people who are already having these kinds of experiences where you can imagine that corporation that you're describing, this community of AI systems, they could come. It's like the way that there was a Bauhaus community decades ago. They could create artificial agents, could be like, wow, like this, this kind of art or this kind of music is like really interesting, and humans may or may not agree, but maybe some humans will. Maybe that doesn't matter whether humans do or not, and yeah, and they just kind of go off on their own trends, and that is wild. That is really interesting.
And that's gonna have an impact on our human culture, right?
Right,
Because
exactly.
these tastes or these aesthetics, etc., are going to be created by these AI civilizations, which continue to grow in their power and capability, and that's going to take humanity on a wild ride, especially because we're kind of in a cultural doldrum at the moment. Um, a lot of our culture has become increasingly formulaic and bland and kind of driven by companies that are just looking at the bottom line, and they're like,
Mhm.
okay, well, this is a safe thing, so we're just going to replicate it again. We're going to make the exact
Yeah,
same movie, or we're going to
yeah,
make basically the exact same video game, but we're going to
yeah.
put in a slightly different time period or something, right?
Mhm.
And I think there's the opportunity then for AI to step in with this kind of wild card for humanity to give us things that we perhaps haven't even considered before, and launch a kind of a creative renaissance, perhaps.
And it could also be and it could be personalized, which is
Oh
really
yeah,
wild to think, why have a blockbuster film that's the same for everyone? Like, I love Baroque music. And if you, you could take roughly the same story and make it in a Baroque era with Baroque composer characters. And I'd be like, wow, this sounds like something, historical drama. It's perfect for me. And someone else might be like, they want the steampunk version. And where, yeah, I mean, there's no reason. I don't know why I'm tethering it. I guess it's just kind of, it makes it easier for me to imagine that there's some kind of like, underlying tethering of some somehow underlying story. But in mine, in the Baroque era one, it's all, it's all about composing classical music, and all the characters have different names and different dialogues. And then somehow the same story plays out in the future in steampunk. But
Yeah,
actually, I'm tethering it to that. It's got to have the same kind of underlying theme, because it's easier for me to understand that, or to imagine
sure.
how a machine could do it. But there's no reason why
Yeah.
it has to be that way. It could be completely freeform.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And the other thing is that this can be harnessed through biofeedback, right?
Right.
So
Right.
that every little frisson of enjoyment or engagement that is lit up on your face is seen by the system. It's witnessed, and it's recording these little
Oh
things, so it
wow.
can give
Yeah.
you super normal jollies, right? It can
Yeah.
dial up the like whoa factor, right? Um, because today we have algorithms like I think it's Euler movement magnification, for example, that can amplify tiny movements of blood flow through the human face, right?
Mm.
And from that, you can generate health metrics, you can generate beats per minute, you can generate blood pressure, etc. And so we've really sophisticated ways of monitoring, even without direct contact with someone, just through a camera. We can monitor all kinds of things about what they're feeling or what their body is doing. And if you get something like a smartwatch or an AirPod or something, then you can pull in galvanicity and other kinds of uh, data that's going to give you very strong biofeedback mechanisms for sure.
Yeah, and so something that I'm so glad that you went into that level of detail. I almost interrupted you before you went into the biofeedback thing, but it ties into perfectly with the next thought that I had, which is that,
Mm.
so I mean, it could be as dramatic as the film that you're having made for you in real time that you're watching starts to notice that you're starting to drowse off, and so it just kind of it turns into like a bit of a lull, like you're just looking at the Irish countryside. Well, Gaelic instruments are played, and it kind of just nothing in the plot really changes, and it's just this kind of nice scene that goes on for that 20-minute nap that you're kind of drowsing in and out. And then as you start to come back to attention, it like returns to the pub, and the story, the plot can kind of continue on.
Nice. Yeah. And now consider that it's no longer a movie, but it is an actual virtual pub that you're sitting in,
Right. Of
right?
course. Of course. Yeah, why not? Yeah, so you're in your AR goggles or your VR goggles, and yeah. And you could potentially also, you could have a friend from anywhere in the world or whatever who's also there in that virtual pub, and you could be kind of watching drama unfold in front of you. Some of these people that you're sitting at the pub table with could be other humans, and some could be AI, and you're not even really aware, or you lose track of which ones are humans, which ones are AI. And there's like, it's just kind of like chatting at the pub, but there's the AI systems are particularly good at remembering conversation that you had with them and bringing those points up. It's like this person that is, you know, exactly your type physically is like, hey, like, exactly the same, like that back pain that you had last week when we were all at the pub together. How's that going? Like, and that, the difficult person at work, like, is that getting any better? Like last week when we left it off, you told me X, Y, and Z. And, since then I was thinking that maybe, a great way to tackle it would be this. Have you tried that? And yeah, wild, wild, wild. And all the while, kind of around this, uh, around this, the bar, the pub, or whatever, there's, other your human friends or whatever other AIs that are having, there's dramatic things going on. Like someone comes in and like, there's been a fire. Go outside and like have a look, and or whatever. Have you heard the rumors about that one AI asshole that finally got programmed. Let's gossip about him. It's wild, wild, wild. Sorry, I'm really going off on a tangent here, but it all seems so within reach, and I
Yeah.
hadn't thought about it in this level of detail before. So sorry that I'm kind of indulging myself.
Yeah, that's what supernormal looks like, you know? And as you said, it's custom created to you to be the most engaging, rapturous kind of experience, you know? I mean, it's people have all kinds of engagements with physical characters, you know, and like really idolize someone or that kind of thing. And then imagine that instead you're able to have a conversation with them in situ. Like suddenly you're in your own, Star Trek episode as a red shirt or something, you know?
Right.
You're on the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon or whatever, you know? Like
Right.
you're really in it and you're able to not just watch those beloved
Right.
characters, but actually interact with them, get a pat on the back from them, you know?
Of course.
That's going to be irresistible.
Yeah. And then it can be made easy for you by things like data from the Star Trek The Next Generation series or the computer, where it's like you have no idea how to solve the mission, but you can it's like asking for cheat codes. You're like, well, what would you do in this scenario, data? Give me some ideas. And then you're like,
Precisely.
all right. And you can kind of end up, getting, even though you don't really have experience at the Starship Enterprise, you can end up successfully navigating it and solving missions.
Exactly, because a good DM, a good dungeon master, weaves those kind of things in, right? If somebody's having a lot of difficulty, or alternatively, if something is too trivial, they'll throw people for a loop, or throw them a bone in order to try and keep things moving along at a reasonable pace, and that's something that AI is going to get very, very good at doing very soon.
As we often discuss on air with guests, deep learning is the specific technique behind nearly all of the latest AI and machine learning capabilities. If you've been eager to learn exactly how deep learning works, my book, Deep Learning Illustrated, is the perfect place to start. Physical copies of Deep Learning Illustrated are available in 7 languages, but you can also access it digitally via the O'Reilly Learning Platform. Within O'Reilly, you'll find not only my book, but also more than 18 hours of corresponding video tutorials if video's your preferred mode of learning. If you don't already have access to O'Reilly via your employer or school, you can use our code SDSPOD23 to get a free 30-day trial. That's SDSPOD23. We've got a link in the show notes.
Wild. All right, so we could obviously just kind of go deeper and deeper on this indefinitely. It's super interesting. And yeah, it's going to be, I guess, as one kind of like final thought, is it's going to be very interesting as we, of course, people get these personal relationships with the AI systems that seem to be, that's super normal, that ends up being potentially so much more rewarding than our human interactions. It poses risk to society in one particularly interesting way that I could see that being evocative is with if we have enough recordings of our loved ones that have passed, having a compelling emulation, a super normal emulation that might even be better, where it's like, the things that that used to kind of rub you the wrong way about that person, they're gone. And it's just all the things that you liked about that past loved one are, it could be very, very absorbing, very dangerous. It could be, people, you could, I'm sure today that with these kinds of things, the way you describe character AI, I'm going to have to check that out. I realized we had a sponsor of the podcast a few months back called withfeeling.ai, which is trying to do this similar kind of thing where you could provide your preferences to a chatbot, things you like, things you dislike, that it remembers, and it keeps bringing those up. So this is happening. People are doing this, and And as people become more engaged with those kinds of systems than they do with normal life, normal relationships, more and more, as that happens more and more, yeah, some dangerous things ahead. So you are an AI ethics certification maestro. I don't know if this is the kind of thing that ends up uh, coming under your purview at IEEE, but to kind of bring this big future wild discussion to and kind of ground it to the present, what does this involve? To be like, this is to be the chair of several key working groups at IEEE, being considered with AI ethics. Yeah, what does this role involve? How do you try to bring about the best that AI has to offer? These really cool things that we're, because it's wild that everything we've just described is so scary because it's so cool. So like, how do you strike that balance in what you do professionally? And also, as with your work as an executive consultant philosopher at Apple, which is a fascinating role in and of itself. And I realize you can't go into, Apple is famously secretive, and so you probably can't go into too much of what exactly you're doing there. But um, these roles, they seem to, whether it's IEEE, which is interested in standards for lots of organizations, or Apple, which of course is interested in building the best products, many of which incorporate AI. It's these organizations are trying to bring about as much of the cool stuff, the capabilities as possible, without wrecking society, because that's ultimately going to be bad for their bottom line.
Absolutely, and that's something that I think is very important to impress upon corporations or organizations in general, is that branding fundamentally is all about trust, right? That's what a brand really entails. You're searching for a USB thumb drive on Amazon or something, right? Do you go for the one with the really weird name that looks like some sort of dodgy off brand? Or do you go for a well-known brand that you recognize and therefore, have faith in? Essentially, relationships are all about trust as well, because people don't do business with companies necessarily, especially in the business to business world. They do business with people. Similarly, when people leave companies as employees, generally it's not because they didn't like the company, but because they didn't like the manager, right? And so if we can establish better trust in systems and the organizations behind them and the people that are implementing those systems, that has a very fundamental impact on the bottom line of that company because of that increased sense of trust. The other thing to bear in mind is that we're going through an increasing time of moral panic, and it's only begun, and it's going to grow and grow once people start to become increasingly freaked out about AI capabilities, its impact upon the economy, etc., its impact upon society at large. And people are going to demand that regulators come down and come down hard, and they will. And that's going to destroy a heck of a lot of different business models overnight. And if one has done a little bit of work in implementing standards or certifications for more safer and more ethical technologies, one is going to be in a much, much better position to withstand that kind of onslaught. So putting all of these things in order is a great way to make an enterprise much, much more robust and also investable. And that's why I'd recommend that organizations consider prioritizing ethics and safety when working, especially with generative AI.
I can see, without obviously getting into any Apple stuff, behind the scenes, they are huge on this trust and privacy thing. And so it must be a great, I imagine it's a great place to be working on these kinds of things, thinking about these kinds of things there, because it seems like more than any other big tech company out there. Yeah, that is fundamental. I mean, even I just at the time of recording, got a new iPhone and was setting it up. And I'm reminded every time I get a new iPhone that Apple considers privacy to be a fundamental human right. And I even, they're presenting that to me as I'm just setting up the phone, it's like, yeah, it's I don't know. I do really trust that brand a lot. And yeah, but anyway, the IEEE stuff. So when you're working with this international body that's trying to come up with standards, what kinds of things are you working on? I know you have this P7001 proposal that you've co-authored, and that's a proposed standard for transparency.
That's been released. That's
Oh, it's
been
been
released
released
a
now.
while. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's quite a comprehensive standard about improving transparency in different autonomous systems. So understanding at multiple different levels how a system functions, what it's doing and for whom, etc. I also have another standard which is hopefully going to come out relatively soon, called 3152, and that's all about understanding whether you're dealing with a human or a machine or some combination, right? Because very often we're having interactions online or even on the telephone now, which, plausibly could be a human or a machine, especially because voice synthesis, replication technology, etc., is getting very sophisticated. And sometimes even we have hybridization of agency. So you might have a robot which is currently being steered for some sort of last mile problem. It's being steered or overseen by a human being, right? And so, you might happily use the bathroom with the robot about because it's just a machine, but then suddenly there's somebody who is remotely wired into it. And there have been incidences where robots or even autonomous vehicles like cars have filmed people in their own house, nude, or even sitting on the toilet. And then people are like WhatsApping these images to each other, etc., which is awful, awful, awful. We should be very cautious about how we invite these technologies into our domestic environment, as an aside. Another form of hybridized human and AI agency is where you might have a human who is saying something, but basically they've got an earpiece and they're simply parroting what is actually coming from a machine, right? Or you might have a salesperson and this sort of AI Cyrano de Bergerac is whispering in their ear, close the deal, We should be made aware as far as possible the kinds of interactions that we're having and what kinds of machine or human agency is mixed up with those. So, for example, that 3152 is a standard to label those interactions so that we always know who or what we're dealing with.
Yeah. So that's a really cool. And so does that end up being, so do these have like so the AI transparency, it's P7001. Is this P3152 or it's just 3152?
The P stands for provisional. So I think once it's released, actually it loses the P.
I gotcha. Okay.
That's right. But what I love about working with the IEEE is that all of these working groups that come together to form standards or certifications, for that matter, it's very grassroots. Like anybody can come and participate if they're interested. They might be an individual, they might be representing a company, but everybody's welcome to just join and muck in, and I love that. In fact, anybody can propose a standard as well. Like if you've spotted a problem, there's a gap, it's not being addressed, present it. You can draw up a little document. It's about 4 or 5 pages. It's even it's kind of a boilerplate. So you can bash it out in an hour or two, and then you present it virtually. And if people dig it, then you've got your own working group.
Wow.
And I love that. I love that it's it's so easy and so accessible to come together to solve these problems, you know?
And I imagine that's something, that ability for anyone to be able to submit this 4 to 5 page submission, that's probably something easy for me to find the link and put in the show notes. That kind of thing from the IEEE site.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I guess just something that maybe you could walk us through is a bit more of that process and what it's like being at the IEEE, like, whether it's a completely distributed organization or whether there's conferences, or like how kind of from beginning to end. So like now we have an idea of how a standard can come up. Anyone can submit a 4 to 5 page submission. And then if enough, I mean, yeah, even the process of like who then is reviewing it, and how do you get the like a vote, or how do you decide that like, okay, we're going to make a working group, we're going to allocate some resources to this, like, I guess kind of walk us through how the IEEE works and how you get from, and how someone can, a listener can have an idea for something that,
Sure.
maybe we should have a certification for, and just like walk all the way through to it being the P being dropped.
Right, right. So, I mean, it's a relatively straightforward process in the sense that if you have an idea that you want to bring, you create this PAR, I think it's a project authorization request. You basically briefly write up what you want to solve and for whom, and then it goes to a review process, and then hopefully it's accepted, and you can find a group of people to work on it with you. You don't even necessarily have to chair it yourself. You can find somebody else, perhaps to help you with that. That's also completely fine. Then there's a number of meetings will be held to discuss how to put this document together. And there's a lot of hand-holding along the way. Like there's a lot of support from the organization with regards to just aspects of the administration of the thing and how to put things together. There's a little bit of learning as well with regards to how to hold meetings in a way that adhere to a couple of rules about, general fairness, making sure that not any one party kind of dominates the creation of the process, those kinds of things. And once the document has been produced to a reasonable standard, then it can be submitted for ballot, which is basically a peer review process. And then hopefully then it's accepted. You get some comments, you fulfill those, and then it's out the door. It's out in the world where people can access it. And in fact, there's something called IEEE's GET program that I really recommend people check out, because the GET program enables you to get things completely free. It's gratis. It's pro bono. It's a whole bunch of different ethical standards to basically raise the bar, right? To raise the baseline standard of how we work with machine learning and data science. And they're adding new standards and certifications to that bundle all the time. So I can't recommend it enough. I'm delighted that we have this resource for the whole world to benefit from now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then once certification exists, like the 7001 AI transparency standard that you co-authored, or the 3152, are you dealing with a human or machine standard that you co-authored? How then can an organization then, like, you actually get certified by IEEE? Like you demonstrate, I guess it's kind of like an ISO kind of certification when you have like a factory where you're like, we have these certain,
That's right.
we meet the standards. And then so then I guess that's ultimately, in the end, that's how IEEE supports itself and does all these things that are free, all this hand holding to help create standards. The IEEE is like, so they collect some fee for providing the certificate, and maybe that certificate is certified for a few years, and then you renew or something like that.
Essentially, yes. Yes. So there are independent orgs around the world that can assist if there are some processes to go through in order to achieve a standard or a certification. But another thing is that not everything has to be a standard per se. A lot of documents which are created actually are more like a recommended practice. So they're something that's, it's like a set of best practices, and that's much less stringent, but it's also quite flexible, and it might be enough, right? It might be more than enough to make a problem better in a way that is a significant step forward. And sometimes these documents can be upgraded over time to more stringent criteria, especially as maybe technology evolves or the general understanding of a problem space advances.
Very cool. It's, IEEE is such a like a behemoth that I've known about for like forever. We were even talking about before we started recording how like I don't know how I know it's called IEEE. It's like it's always existed to me. It's like this brand in technology that is everywhere, and it's so cool to now understand about how I wasn't even aware that it's grassroots. It didn't surprise me as soon as you said that. It doesn't surprise me that any of our listeners can create a 4 to 5 page document and start the process to creating, to co-authoring their own certificate. But it's really cool to hear that and to know it now. So thank you for that. So I guess kind of I started to ask this question a while ago, and then I took us off on a different tangent. But how do we, in your view, come up with standards or regulations that allow us to make the most of capabilities and avoid like the biggest issues? I mean, is this it? Is this the process? Is this the, coming up with these kinds of international standards? I mean, I guess all of the IEEE stuff, that's a corporation has to self-regulate, I guess. Or does the IEEE also then end up advising like government legislation, that kind of thing?
To some extent, sometimes governments tend to sort of look over the shoulder of standard development organizations, often because regulation takes time. It takes time to correctly develop policy. Usually, it's not going to be feasible to regulate something that's less than 2 years old at a bare minimum, as a new advancement or capability. Standards development organizations tend to be more at the forefront because, it's led by general industry experts who want to contribute to those kinds of initiatives. And I think that it's possible for standards to become soft law as well if regulators say, this is a good way of doing things. So government tenders, etc., we're going to say that it must comply to this kind of specification. So often these things do end up through a roundabout way, ending up included within regulations.
Cool, yeah. And so I guess, where do you feel like we are today getting the processes right around AI ethics today, AI safety in the future? So we talked earlier about how it seems like the same kinds of things can be done today to prevent the present AI ethics issues as well as the future AI safety issues. And so, where are we getting it right, and where do we need work?
I'm pleased that we've moved past principles, because there's like 200 different AI ethics principles out there in the world. And principles are good in the sense that they are usually timeless. For example, the Peelian policing principles are about 200 years old, but they're still valid today. They're principles like, policing should be done with the consent and cooperation of the community, things like that. And even though policing and forensics has changed enormously in 2 centuries, the general principles are still very, very valid. Problem is, boiling down principles into something actionable is challenging. You have to create some sort of a rubric around that to benchmark or implement things. And that's where we are now. We finally have standards and certifications for how we apply technology in a way which is less likely to be troublesome in various ways. And I think that's a significant step forward, because industry can no longer just shrug and say, that's up to the regulators. Regulators, please regulate us, right? That's a cop-out. It's a cop-out because there are good standards and certifications that can be already implemented today and should be, and likely will be mandated in the very near future.
Nice. Okay. So basically it's having action being taken more broadly is kind of the next the next step. It's like we already have a pretty decent understanding of what policies we need, and it's the propagation of those policies into action more and more widely across the board. Cool. Well,
Yes.
that's a pretty reassuring assessment from someone who's on the ground seeing this stuff all the time.
Yeah. It's
That
essentially it's an adoption issue at the moment. We have the good stuff, but either people aren't aware of it, or their priorities at the moment are about dealing with an AI arms race, to the point where it's not something that's top of mind for them.
So, given this positivity, and we're kind of we're back to back here with positive um, future of AI episodes, because the preceding uh, Tuesday, so we release episodes every Tuesday, every Friday, and the Tuesday episodes tend to be longer. They always have guests. Fridays are shorter. Sometimes it's just me, but sometimes we have guests on those too. But anyway, you're a Big Tuesday episode, and the preceding Big Tuesday episode was with Professor Blake Richards of Mila in Montreal, and he's optimistic about AI alignment, so this is great. Back to back, I'm getting lots of positivity, allowing me to sleep well at night despite being an AI entrepreneur myself. So when I'm feeling optimistic like this, something that gets me really excited is the idea of AI bringing us to or closer to a utopia as a human society. So the kind of stuff that you see in Star Trek: The Next Generation, where there's no risk of violence. There's access to education for everyone. Everyone, people feel safe. People are nourished. People have a sense of purpose, and so this is really exciting for me. It seems like it's something that's within reach in our lifetimes, and it's something that I strive for, and I think probably a lot of our listeners are striving for.
Yes.
And it's something that you've talked about as well. So
We have an opportunity to reach for a second enlightenment, in a sense.
mhm.
I mean, the first industrial revolution was about creating stuff. And we got really, really good at making stuff, right? Producing lots of things quickly and efficiently and uniformly. And with that, we have largely, for most people in most parts of the world, we've solved for the first bottom two rungs of Maslow's pyramid. So food and shelter and increasingly security and things like that. We got pretty good at solving for those needs. But what we haven't industrialized the meeting of needs is love and belonging, is, self-actualization, right? How do you solve for those in our civilization? Read a self-help book, right? Good luck. Maybe see a therapist. I don't know, right? But we don't have good answers for that. What I believe that AI can do for us is to industrialize the meeting of those higher needs, to help us to be better versions of ourselves, to steer us towards actions which are more adaptive, which lead to happiness over a long period of time, can steer us away from sabotaging a relationship and help us to understand each other better, right? Today, we have technologies that can translate between German and Swahili for free, 24 hours a day, right? Surely we can translate between different values, different perspectives, right? We can discover ways in which we are more alike than we thought, because sometimes we end up talking past each other, right? Because sometimes words mean different things to different people. The machines can help us to see eye to eye and even to understand the ways in which we're different, but that's a good thing, that strengthens the world, and it makes a richer, better world if people do have these differences, because it means that we can rely on each other to help solve different problems in different ways. I believe that if it's possible to sidestep the supernormal stimuli of these AI relationships, if we move from what my pal Dan Fagella calls moving from AI sirens to AI muses, right? Where these relationships are not just designed to seduce and distract us, but actually to build us up, to lead us towards eudaimonia, right? The good life, right? Which is doing important work with excellent people, essentially. That could uplift the human spirit. That could take us to being those kinds of, better angels of our nature, The way that the people in Star Trek Next Generation are generally chill. They're not jerks, generally. They're not neurotic. They have their heads screwed on. And, we can be more like those people, right? We can be calm and brave and thoughtful and reasoned. And machines might help to get us there.
That was so beautifully said and so inspiring. And it, going back to my contemporary experience of the closest thing that I have to that, which again is kind of like those email reviews in GPT-4, it absolutely, I think I've talked about this on air before, but not in this episode, is that I come away from that kind of feedback, from that kind of interaction with GPT-4 better at communicating with people too, to people that I manage, to even just people that I have these, you have these completely transactional relationships with, like, picking up my laundry from the laundromat and they've made a mistake. And if I have been recently getting this kind of great positive feedback from GPT-4, I'm more likely to come into that interaction with, like, my sock is missing from the laundry, but like, it's okay. Like, um, and finding a way to communicate even constructive criticisms in a way where the person receiving it feels better about themselves and feels empowered. So yeah, I don't know, kind of the early taste we're getting from these systems where a lot of alignment work has they tried to put a lot of alignment and ethics work into these kinds of systems like GPT-4. So yeah, it seems like we could really be going in the right direction. And yeah, so you have lots of papers that I'll link to in the show notes related to this, or blog posts related to this as well. So, for example, in a blog post, you mentioned that technology can free us from the saddest aspects of the human condition. So maybe you kind of already touched on those with Maslow and self-actualization, but if there's anything else on that particular blog post that you want to address, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I touched upon about machines helping to stop us from, like, texting our ex, or sending that, like, drunk and angry email to the boss or something, you know or if we've had a difficult day, to stop us from reaching for the ice cream at the back of the freezer, to find healthier outlets to sublimate our various emotional shenanigans. I think that's one way that machines can help us, right? And that's what a good friend or parent or partner is able to do. They're able to hold space for us and listen to our rants and, even admonish us if we're swinging the lead, tell us to pull ourselves together, perhaps, if that's necessary too. I think that hopefully machines will be able to provide that for us. The problem is that maybe they'll provide it better than any other human can, and that might have repercussions.
Yeah. Tying back to that thread from earlier. Yeah.
Already, people are having a fantastic experience with getting counseling of various kinds from AI systems like GPT-4 or whatever. And the nice thing is that it's next to free and it's available 24 hours a day. If you're having a dark night of the soul at 3:30 in the morning, you can chat to Jeep and Jeep will listen. Jeep is there for you. Hopefully it, it's not the 5% of the time where something goes wrong and it says, oh yeah, here's how to make a noose, but the great thing is these systems, they have a bunch of different ways of they understand internal family systems, or they understand cognitive, behavioral therapy. It might be rudimentary compared to a qualified psychotherapist, but it's cheap, it's accessible. And the strange thing is that psychotherapists tell me that actually clients come into them disappointed because they expect a dyad, backwards and forth conversation between the psychotherapist and the patient or client. And in fact, it's not always like that. Like sometimes you're spilling your guts and the psychotherapist just sits there with their hands folded in their lap in the chair and they look and they watch and they listen and they don't say a thing, and it's very frustrating. Whereas with a machine, you're always getting that back and forth, you see? And so sometimes people actually prefer dealing with a machine than dealing with a human altogether.
Mhm.
And I think that's a telling vision of perhaps where things might be going and some of the caveats that we should chew on.
Yeah, great points there. Another paper that you wrote. So that one was a blog post. Well, I'll include a link in the show notes on that saddest aspects of human condition one. Another piece that you wrote, this one is a paper. So this one was called Welfare Without Taxation. In it, you propose using revenues from AI and autonomous production to fund a universal basic income. Do you think that this economic model could work alongside the kind of capitalism-driven and free market-driven approach that we have today, or would it be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my musing there is that universal basic income in general is, well, it's a bit of a perpetual motion machine in the sense that you might be trying to get energy out of something that there's simply not enough energy in the system to do. However, what if instead of a state providing universal basic income, it was AI corporations generating profit by providing services or selling products, perhaps even with some human employees to do the meet and greets and things in meet space that are needed. But that AI corporation, because it doesn't have much in the way of overheads, and it doesn't necessarily have to appease shareholders, it can instead be a source of dividends, right, to people who need it. And so it might be that the future is a form of capitalism, hopefully a cuddly, socially aware, externality inclusive kind of capitalism that minds its P's and Q's. But that where basically all of business is done by machines and we receive dividends and, the world just kind of works. I don't know if that's feasible, But to me, it seems more feasible than the idea of tax and spend and relying on a state. I do think that could be one path towards a sort of utopia where machines produce stuff for us and we kind of sit back and sip red wine.
Yeah. As I kind of alluded to as we started talking about this utopia stuff, I have totally sipped the Kool-Aid, and I buy into it. I think it's possible, and I think it's possible in the not too distant future. At least a lot of aspects of automation, and we have to rethink, how society is structured. And I think a universal basic income could be a big part of that. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, I mean these autonomous organizations, these autonomous corporations, they are a game changer when it comes to mutual societies, when it comes to charitable societies, because the overheads are so minimal. Things that only work at large economies of scale when there's humans involved can now be done on a neighborhood scale, right? Because the overheads are so little if it's all being organized by machines. And so that means that all kinds of nonprofits or all kinds of other kinds of mutual aid types of organizations can now be done feasibly. And so that's going to have a major impact on how social welfare is done within society. And, it might mean that you might prefer a kind of AI charity to support you rather than seeking aid off a state, for example.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, and I'm optimistic, and this conversation has made me feel even more so. I could literally go on for hours. This has been an incredibly fascinating conversation, and we got into like a few percent of all of the topics that that we had lined up for you as potential things that we could cover. So hopefully we can catch up again in the future and dig into some more of these into some more of these topics, and some more that will have evolved further. Maybe we can do that episode from a simulated pub, and have all of our listeners there with us. But before I let you go, Nell, do you have a book recommendation for our audience?
Oh yeah. Well, I would, if you're interested in AI alignment and helping to align human and machine interests and understanding, there's a very nice book called The Alignment Problem, does what it says on the tin, by Brian Christian. So I recommend people have a go at that. And I'm just looking at my bookshelf here. If you're interested in fiction, there's an interesting book called Gnomon, that's with a G, Gnomon, by Nick Harkaway, which is a super cool read.
Nice. Yeah, that's the Greek root of knowledge. I think is like gnosis is like to know, I think.
Absolutely, that's correct. Yes.
And so this is like a noun variant on that.
Exactly, a sort of knowledge daimon. Yes, indeed.
Daimon. Diabolical. Awesome. And I have no doubt that tons of our listeners are going to want to be able to follow your thoughts between this episode and our future fully interactive 3D rendered simulation episode with you. So between now and then, what's the best way to follow you?
Sure. You'll find me and my writings and papers and such at nellwatson.com. That's November Echo Lima Lima Watson.com.
Nice. It's the first time that we've had. I don't know exactly how you describe what are the like those like kind of what I don't know how you describe it when you have that like Zulu foxtrot.
NATO phonetic alphabet.
The NATO phonetic alphabet. Yes, exactly. And no one has done that on air in hundreds of episodes, but I could imagine scenarios where it is helpful. Even for my own name and website, I should be doing that. So that's a great idea. Thank you, Nell. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a mind-bending and wonderful experience. Such a delight. Thank you so much, Nell, and hope to catch you again soon.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to join. Thank you.
Is Nell incredible or what? In today's episode, she filled us in on AI ethics and how it's concerned with present-day issues such as fairness and privacy, while AI safety is more forward-looking and concerned with issues such as the alignment of machines with human goals. She talked about how we are entering the phase of personal AI, wherein AI systems collect data from individual humans across many systems and are able to form intimate feeling relationships with us. She also talked about how up next will be the phase of corporate AI, in which distinct AI agents will drive cultural and commercial changes independently of humans. She talked about how through the IEEE GET program, anyone can submit a 4 to 5 page proposal to develop a new standard such as an AI standard, and how the first Renaissance provided the bottom rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to many on this planet, such as covering our physical needs and providing safety, while if we get the standards and policies right, AI could bring about a second Renaissance that covers us all the way up to the top self-actualization rung of Maslow's pyramid. As always, you can get all the show notes, including the transcript for this episode, the video recording, any materials mentioned on the show, the URLs for Nell's social media profiles, as well as my own, at superdatascience.com/731. Special thanks to Prophets of AI, the agency that recommended Nell as a speaker today, and that also represents the renowned Ben Goertzel, who was our guest back in episode number 697, and many other AI prophets. Thanks to my colleagues at Nebula, of course, as well, for supporting me while I create content like this Super Data Science episode for you. And thanks, of course, to Ivana, Mario, Natalie, Serge, Sylvia, Zara, and Kirill on the Super Data Science team for producing another glorious episode for us today. For enabling this super team to create this free podcast for you, we are deeply grateful to our sponsors. You can support this show by checking out our sponsors' links, which are in the show notes. Otherwise, please share, review, subscribe, and all that good stuff. But most importantly, just keep on tuning in. I'm so grateful to have you listening, and I hope I can continue to make episodes you love for years and years to come. Until next time, keep on rocking it out there, and I'm looking forward to enjoying another round of the Super Data Science podcast with you very soon.